So, what actually is this book, Love and Respect?
But then there were rage issues again with my dad. My dad attempted to strangle my mother to death.
I thank God for my mom, who never badmouthed my dad.
But that makes no sense as far as like a healed, centered place.
And that's a traumatized response.
It was my fault that he was not loving me.
I didn't realize how much it had impacted me until we were married.
It still messes with me to this day.
This is the third part of a 3-part series that we are doing as a deep dive into the best-selling evangelical marriage book, Love and Respect. In part 1, we talked about the actual content of the book and why the teachings are so either bizarre, illogical, or downright dangerous. In part 2, we talked about how even though this book was presented as this brand new, groundbreaking, scientific, and biblically solid way of doing marriage, it was in fact stolen from previous ideas. The research was shoddy and the biblical scholarship was worse. But today, in part 3, I think it's really important that we take this outside the theoretical and we talk to some actual people who were harmed by this book. That is a great idea, and we are totally going to get to that. But in the process of editing this and filming this, we actually changed how we're doing this whole video. So you're going to be seeing a lot of me in this video, editor Rebecca, who's going to come in and just kind of fill in those blanks, pave that road between what we originally planned and what we ended up doing. So we're totally going to get to the stories of people who are harmed by love and respect. You'll see them peppered throughout this video. But first, we're actually going to take a step back in time. And we're going to look at what Emerson Eggerichs tells us about what it was like to grow up in his family. Emerson Eggerichs is open in his book and his conferences about how his father had a history of being abusive. He talks about his father's rage and his outbursts and how terrifying they were for the family.
But one thing is my daddy had rage issues, and there was no safety zone. You know, he'd be going along and then boom, there was no warning. But they were divorced for a year and then they reconciled, but then there were rage issues again with my dad, and so mom and dad separated for like 4 or 5 years.
But I want to read you one story that he shares on his website. Here's what Emerson Eggerichs says. I can recall instances from my early childhood when my dad would go into a rage. On one occasion, my mother had purchased several pieces of new furniture and had it delivered to the house. Dad was furious over how she had spent the money, and he threw out all the furniture. I can still see in my mind one of the pieces tumbling down the stairs to the sidewalk. I was petrified by my dad's temper, and there were other explosions that were even worse. After Dad died, I shared with my mother another memory of something that happened when I was around 3 years old. It comes to me in scenes, and in the first scene, my mom and dad are having some kind of argument. In the next scene, my father is strangling my mother. He has her up against the refrigerator with his hands around her throat, and he is choking her. I run to help and hit my dad with my little fists, trying to make him stop. He just slaps the top of my head and pushes me out of the way. In the final scene, my mother is sitting on a brick wall somewhere outside and she is crying. A neighbor lady is talking to my mom through her window, asking, "Jay, are you all right?" Then the horrific episode fades from my mind. When I told my mother my recollection of what happened, she was in shock. Her face displayed utter dismay. "You remember this? You were too young to remember this. I can't believe you remember this." But I did.
I have this recollection of Dad attempting to strangle you to death, and she was in shock, and she said, "There's no way you could remember that." And I said, "Well, I do remember." And I said to Mom, "He had you up against the refrigerator, he had his hands around your neck, you were turning red, and I could tell this, it was vivid, I can see it even now, you couldn't breathe, I could tell that this was something that was not right. I went toward Dad, he kind of knocked me down, the scene ends."
And then as he gets older, he finds out his dad's been cheating on his mom. And I mean, it's exactly as you'd expect.
Mom said, "Well, your dad is committing adultery with another woman." And the word defilement captures what I felt at that moment. So it just something like died in me. I just remember just something defiled me.
Emerson talks a lot about his parents in the book and in the conference. And in doing so, he continuously and constantly praises his mother for never bad-mouthing his father.
My mother did not reduce my dad to a one-sentence descriptor. He's a no-good bum. She never did that. But what's interesting is that my mother never allowed me to, she never badmouthed my dad.
And Emerson's dad didn't stop being abusive when he was 3 years old. It seems from Emerson's own accounts that this was a long-term, repeated problem throughout his formative years. Emerson tells a story of why he got sent to military school sometime in the late childhood, early teen years. But he says this.
My dad attempted to strangle my mother to death. You saw that in the video clip when I was 2.5, and I wet the bed until I was 11. My dad committed adultery when I was about 11, and then I was sent off to military school because at one point I took a butcher knife and told Mom I was going to kill Dad. It was false bravado, but Mom realized I needed to get out of the home.
I want to be clear. You will have seen through watching 2.5 videos of us talking about this book that I am not the biggest fan of Emerson Eggerichs. I think that's fair to say. He knows that. I don't think he's my biggest fan either, and that's okay. But I do want to be clear, I don't have evidence that this man is actually physically violent. There are not stories about him beating people up at school. This does not seem to have been a repeated problem where this man is pulling knives on people, getting in fist fights, being physically bullying and abusive to other people. He does not seem to have been a delinquent child by all accounts. The 2 examples that we are given throughout Emerson Eggerichs' life of him trying to use violence against someone, both of them are against his father. And both of them are when he is merely a child in an environment with a scary, scary man who has tried to kill his mother. Let us be clear, that is what strangulation is. And it is horrifying and abhorrent that a little boy had to watch his father do that. Women who have experienced strangulation from a partner have a 7 times higher likelihood that that partner will actually kill them. So in light of all that information, all that we've just discussed, this clip hits different.
She has this love tank connected by an air hose, and she needs to breathe in that love from me. And when I come in and stand in her air hose, she deflates. The issue is no longer the issue. The issue is I'm standing on her love air hose, and she's deflating. Oh, I can't breathe.
We can't believe it. They keep stepping on my air hose. Get off my air hose. And so we push them off our air hose, and we step on theirs without seeing it. It's like you stepped on their air hose. They just deflate. They close off. And when you see the spirit of your husband deflate, he's feeling disrespected, right or wrong. I'm just telling you, it felt like you stepped on my air hose. Would you please step off?
In discussing the people's need for love and respect, it is telling that the imagery that is used is one of cutting off someone's air supply.
I can't breathe.
We talked to Jay Stringer and Andrew Bowman about how our complicated childhood stories can show up in the present day. Let's hear what they had to say.
With the context of his story and the fact that he talks about when women don't respect their husbands, she's cutting off his air hose. I was just wondering if you have thoughts on that, on how metaphor from our childhood impacts things.
You know, the images, the metaphors that he's using are windows, not necessarily into good wisdom, but windows into how he has conceptualized the world. That scene is complex trauma. It's domestic violence. I think that those are often the sense of people trying to make meaning potentially too soon out of these things. And so whenever that type of trauma is happening, part of what we know just happens in the brain is that like Broca's area, which is the region of speech, can go offline. How are you supposed to put words to the reality that your father is strangling your mother that might, take the life out of her? So all of that is stored into his body. And so that's oftentimes what happens with, trauma survivors is we don't know our traumas primarily through our memories. We know our traumas through our reactions. So the ways that he would have observed his dad feeling disrespected about the furniture, that's internalized in him, not necessarily as a memory of my wife shouldn't have got the furniture, but it's a young child's conceptualizing of how do I make sense of the violence of my father. He's having a traumatized way of imagining, okay, if my mom had just been more respectful, then this would have mitigated family violence. And that's a traumatized response rather than really grappling with the anger and the grief of what that scene was. So to me, that's much more of a window into a young child's conceptualizing of how do I mitigate violence? Because that's what the brain is primarily concerned with, is how do I stay alive? But if you can't control your dad, meaning I try and hit him with my little fist, but it's to no good, the next best solution is mom's behavior should probably get improved. And his little fist didn't do much, but his words and asking for respect and trying to organize and create a level of order and respect would allow for some containment of the chaos of his childhood.
We also asked Dr. Andrew Bowman his reaction to the same question. How do you think that Emerson's childhood trauma might be impacting his teachings about how failing to give your husband respect is like stepping on his air hose?
That works if that wounded little boy has never healed. That makes sense, actually. That makes sense. Like, save me, mom. Like, give me life, right? It's like, let me breathe. But that makes no sense as far as like a healed centered place, right? You cannot be spiritually healthy if you are emotionally unhealthy. They go hand in hand. And so literally that story, horrific trauma, has to be dealt with head on. I mean, it reminds me of stories I heard this weekend at our men's group. Just this horrific, intense trauma that these men suffered. And we have to go into that trauma. Not only go into it and tell the story, we have to feel the story. Because feeling the story, then we can grieve the story, then we can move beyond the story. Because trauma unaddressed is trauma reenacted. So you will continue to reenact the trauma again and again in your present day relationships. Normally, the present day relationships that are most close to you, i.e. your wife and your kids, right? That trauma is going to be reenacted until you run straight towards it to heal it and to feel it.
But love and respect, with all of its inconsistencies, its double standards, its damaging teachings, it all makes sense when you stop seeing it as a biblical scholar's theory of Christian marriage and you start seeing it as a man's complicated attempt to rationalize, explain away, and redeem his parents' marriage.
But as a result of that, I begin to try to think, how does a mommy and daddy live together? How does a husband and wife live together? What does it mean for us to do marriage? And I made some discoveries. One of which is what I call the crazy cycle. She reacts without respect, he reacts without love, and it gets crazy. And what's even more interesting, without love, defensively she reacts. She knows she's defensively reacting. What she doesn't see is she reacts offensively without respect.
And I could see that my dad reacted the way he was because of his insecurities and the way he misinterpreted Mom's messages. He thought she was sending messages of disrespect. He didn't doubt her love. He thought she didn't like him. And that in his insecurity and his misreading situations, his rage would surface. And then, of course, his harshness and anger and everything just devastated Mom and she closed off. But as I got into this, I began to realize there's a connection here. Without love, she reacts without respect. Without respect, he reacts without love. Whoa. And then I began to realize without love, she's reacting because she's insecure. So without love, defensively, which is what happened to my mom, she reacted offensively without respect. She wasn't trying to be offensive. But my dad, not being able to discern that, he reacts when he feels disrespected. So without respect, defensively, he reacts offensively without love. And in its extreme, he puts her up against the refrigerator and tries to choke her out.
I mean, let's take those air hoses, okay? The psychological reversal of talking about how women, when women don't respect men, it's like they're strangling their husbands.
So I have this air hose connected by this respect tank, and I need to breathe in that respect like I breathe in air. And when she stands on my air hose,
the subtext seems to be, well, see, my dad was experiencing this too, but in a different way. This is like God tier level sin leveling. And then you have the whole thing about how Emerson keeps repeating about he would die for you. He needs you to know that he would die for you. He would put his life on the line for you.
Nothing's positive in our marriage. He's unloving. No. He would die for you. And you would die for your wife and your family. He feels the responsibility to die for you.
And is my husband really trying to be unloving? The truth is he would die for you. Literally, he would die for you if a burglar came into a house and attempted to murder you. Is he always as loving as he should be? No, but he will die for you. And Jesus said, no greater love is a man than this.
He's a good-willed man who would die for you.
I'm a good-willed man who would die for you if you don't kill me first.
When his father attempted murder on his mother, let us be clear. People minimize strangling a lot. Strangling is attempted murder. Strangling is a type of physical abuse that is attempted murder. It also explains why this definition of what evil-willed men is just so bizarre and so narrow.
And don't just take a snapshot of something that happened that was evil. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were evil-willed. Adultery may have happened, but that doesn't necessarily mean that person's an evil-willed person because they've done evil things. You know, you've got to be very cautious before you conclude that your spouse is Hitler's distant cousin. And remember, that is the mommy or daddy of your child.
Well, trauma therapy and talk therapy and All of this stuff is talked about a lot more openly today. It wasn't back when Emerson was growing up, and it certainly wasn't even in the 90s and early 2000s when Love and Respect was released. The practical applications of love and respect are almost entirely contingent on the woman soothing, placating, and just getting out of the way of a man's emotions. It's about making sure he doesn't experience anything negative. Remember that ridiculous example about how Emerson forgot Sarah's birthday and the takeaway was that he felt disrespected, that he was reminded that he had failed her? Like, that is bizarre. That is just bizarre. There's no reason that that should be the takeaway. How is the takeaway not, and then I was an ass? Like, how is the takeaway not, I was the problem here? But that's not the takeaway. The takeaway in that section is I was feeling disrespected. That's ridiculous. But it does make sense when you see the whole love and respect connection, the love and respect theory, as a way for Emerson to desperately just try to get his mommy to do what she needs to do so that daddy stops yelling at her.
If somebody had just gotten to my mom and dad like maybe I'm having the privilege of getting to some of you. And this is the longing I had of my mom and dad who never heard this in those early years. If someone had just communicated to them, I wonder if my mom and dad could have gone another direction.
All of love and respect makes sense when you see it through the lens of Emerson Eggerichs' childhood. When you see it through the lens of a little boy trying to figure out how do a mommy and daddy do life together. But the question is, does his theory hold up? Is it true that enough unconditional respect can make an abusive, entitled, selfish man a caring and loving husband? Well, let's go talk to Jenny. Do you want to tell us about how you think the love and respect message impacted your marriage, for better or for worse?
It definitely was for worse. It fed me the lie that if I just tried harder, that I would be able to fix things, right? Like, oh, this is the key, right? You're just not respecting him enough. That's the problem here. And so it kept me stuck for a lot longer than I would have needed to have been.
Do you remember in particular which teachings would have made you feel like if you just tried harder, it would get better? So if it's not getting better, it must be because you're not doing enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just the idea that he needed unconditional respect. He was doing things that were not worthy of respect. So then it must be my fault because I wasn't giving him what he needed. So therefore, that's why he was treating me the way that he was treating me. At the pulpit, they talked a lot about the crazy cycle. And so I really just believed that that's what we were in. And so as a reflective person, like trying to own my own stuff, not realizing that other people don't do the same. I thought that if I must not be doing my part right.
And how would you qualify how your relationship was? Do you think, was your relationship dysfunctional? Was it abusive?
It was abusive. And it took about 10 years in before I realized it. It was abusive from the morning of our honeymoon, is when it switched for me. But as an evangelical complementarian, I didn't have words to put to what was happening.
So is it fair to say that you were raised in a culture that hadn't given you the words to explain what abuse was? And then love and respect came around and said, well, if he's not behaving in a loving way, it's because you have conditions on him.
Yes, that is exactly what love and respect taught me, is that it was my fault that he was not loving me because I was not doing respect correctly.
How did that impact you emotionally, even outside of the relationship? What did it do to your sense of self?
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's when I finally, I mean, it took many years, but it finally got me to realize that this is abuse. This is not just dysfunction. This is not just marriage is supposed to be hard, suck it up. Because I remember distinctly thinking, and this would have been in the time when we were in the small group that was studying love and respect, that it was all the time, like, I am good at everything else in my life except for being a wife. And then therefore he tainted how I was a mother too. The two things that I always thought that I wanted the most in life. And I would ask Jesus, like, I followed the rules. Like, I am doing this the way that I was taught. Why is this the only place in my life that I can't figure out what I'm doing wrong? And so, yeah, it totally eroded my sense of self to the point where I had never had issues with depression or anxiety. And even to, I mean, towards the very end, I was like, I am going to die here. Like, I can't do this. Thankfully, I had the strength to get out of the relationship instead of taking my life. But it got to that point. But when I realized that it was coming to the point where my son was learning patterns that were completely unacceptable, and same for my daughter, like I have one of each, and I'm like, no, this is not what their legacy is going to be for me.
Jenny followed the love and respect playbook, and it didn't work, just like it hasn't worked for hundreds and thousands of other women too, married to abusive men. And I know it's incredibly awkward to talk about this stuff when it's real people and they're still alive, and that doesn't escape me, and that weighs quite heavily on me, actually. I don't like this part of it, but it is important, because while Emerson Eggerichs is a real person, so is Jenny, and so are the hundreds and thousands of other women who have been harmed by this teaching. But the fact of the matter is, when we choose to stand up there and say we have God's message to people.
I have to say that I believe God spoke to me then, and the message and insight I was given I cannot keep to myself. I know who God calls you to be more than I think you know that.
This is the way of God.
God's not a liar here.
That this is the Christian way to do marriage, that this is biblical, this is what the Bible says, this is, if you don't do this, you are sinning. Then quite frankly, you need to be held to account. You need to have your sources checked. You need to be tested. That is actually a biblical concept, that teachers are judged more harshly than others. And so if you're going to be a teacher, you better have your life in order. And again, claiming God's name to bolster what you are saying and not actually saying the word of God, especially when you are literally editing the word of God to convince women to give up their voice, that is the third commandment. You are taking the Lord's name in vain. And it does get dicey. When we're talking about teachers, they're still alive. They have stuff going on in their personal lives. It can be awkward. But the fact of the matter is, the people who work in the spaces of spiritual abuse prevention, of narcissism, of all these things, they also agree that it is necessary to do the hard work of asking, how did we get here, and holding people to account. How do we balance the empathy for the teacher with the accountability for the harm done?
Yeah, well, it's tough when there's harm being done, right? Because I think we have to lean toward accountability. If you're perpetuating harm in a way that is hurting people, has likely been hurting people for a long, long time, I think that's where in those cases, when I'm doing consultations, it's accountability first, and then let's get that person into a setting where they can begin to do the work. But I don't think that work can happen unless they fully step out of, let's say in this case, ministry for a significant period of time. There's no quick change. It's not a 6-week sabbatical, in other words, right? It's like you need to be out of ministry for a period of years for you to do this work. So that's hard accountability. And then I can bring the empathy like that to courage. I'm glad you're here, and we can do the work. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So in essence, the community's responsibility is, quite frankly, to protect the community. It's accountability. And then also let's find you a therapist to help you with
Yeah. And I think sometimes it's the exact opposite, right? Like, we don't want to see him lose his job or his livelihood.
Yes.
Well, actually, sometimes that's the only way they change, is if they lose their job, their livelihood, their spouse leaves them. It takes that kind of radical disorientation and disruption in their lives. And so, but yeah, we try to protect them because of our own stuff. That gets back to our own issues, right? Like we want to protect abusers.
Well, and I think it's so ironic that in the Christian church, where we believe it is better for a man to lose his life and save his soul, that we're so willing to fail to hold people to account when they are doing soul damaging things because it might damage their life.
Yeah. Reputation and all of that stuff, right? Yeah.
How do we balance the empathy for what he went through with the accountability for what he is continuing to perpetuate?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I know what is it, 20 years? How long has that book been around? 20 years?
21 years.
21 years. Yeah. Trauma was not on the radar. We have to start speaking up. That's why you guys are, have such respect for your all's work, that you're blazing the trail of you're speaking truth to power, right? You're calling for more integrity in this work and in the Christian space, in writers and research, and rather than just writing from this place of deep wounds and celebrating hierarchy and immature male egos.
I am someone who likes to be efficient. I like to use everything to its greatest potential. And something that I find so frustrating and just existentially annoying about the love and respect situation is that the reason why Emerson Eggerichs was given the opportunity to harm so many through his own wounding is because he's freaking good at it. This man is really charismatic. He's an excellent performer. He's funny. He's a good-looking guy. Like this, he has so much going for him. The man uses the whole stage in his conferences. He's gregarious. He's likable. This is someone who, it doesn't surprise me that he became successful. The sadness of this, though, is that the evangelical church had such bad judgment that they handed this platform to this man when he could have used these skills in so many other better ways. Like, the dude could have been a really great stand-up comedian. Or maybe he would have become a radio DJ or something. I don't know what he would have done, but he is incredibly skilled. And it's just awful to see these powers were used for evil, right? Like these powers that were so good were used for the dark side. And I don't think that it was on purpose. I desperately hope, as Chuck DeGroat was saying, that Emerson Eggerichs has people in his personal life and his community who can extend empathy to him in a very real, tangible, personal way. But it is up to us as the community to be the accountability that he should have had back in the 1990s that would have put a stop to this whole thing back then. And we have to wrestle with how do we balance the extreme harm that was caused to someone with the harm that they are now causing to others? What do we do when the story of great wounding makes sense? Eggerichs' heinous theology, his blatant misunderstanding of abuse dynamics and what a good-willed versus evil man really is, his continuing to promote male entitlement to women's bodies, all of this makes complete sense when you consider the complicated family dynamics that he was grappling with from his own childhood. Remember again that every time he talked about his abusive father, he praises his mother for never saying a mean word.
She never badmouthed my dad. I thank God for my mom, who never badmouthed my dad. And I am the recipient of my mom's decision never to badmouth my dad.
It is psychologically torturous to grow up in an environment where you know that there is great harm being done and you are never allowed to talk about it. So yes, Eggerichs is able to call his father an evil man back then, but he also calls him fully repentant, all while claiming that the thing that fixed his father was his mother's subservience. Any expert in abuse dynamics is going to tell you that simply obeying your abuser more is not what fixes them. And if someone requires you to be a shell of yourself, to dissociate, to cater to their every whim in order to be recovered and rehabilitated, that's not true recovery. Now, obviously, we want to be careful because these are real people and we don't know their whole story and we only know what has been told to us by Emerson Eggerichs. But what Emerson portrays is that the thing that brought his abusive father to the Lord and what changed him was his mother learning respect. And again, remember, respect is not defined in this book and in this multiverse of information as treating someone with the human dignity afforded to them as someone who's made in the image of God. We're talking about respect in terms of this silence, this no criticism, never speaking a bad word. As someone who does rehabilitation of abusive men, do you think that is a healthy or safe way to present to women who might be in abusive relationships the road towards an abuser repenting?
Well, safety is always the first goal, right? So a lot of times it's like, it's actually not safe to tell the truth. So
Yes.
if it's physical harm, physical danger, then you got to get safe first. But then second, no, you have to tell the truth. You have to speak up once you are safe, right? Once your kids are safe. So safety first, and then truth telling. I truly believe God is truth. And the more we live in truth, the more we experience God, right? And that's, I truly believe that down to my core. Rather than if you just respect him enough, he's going to change. That puts the onus on women. That puts the onus on victims, rather than actually, let's put it where it belongs. Rather than all this emotional labor we're giving to women, let's actually give it back to the men.
One of the members of our team is Sheila Gregor, who also happens to be my mother, and she'd already been a writer in the marriage and sex space in Christianity for quite a while, for over a decade at the point that we actually read Love and Respect. But one day she read this book, and the group chat between me, Joanna, and my mother just blew up. We read all those quotes that we showed you in video 1. We read the horrible excuse for research and biblical scholarship that we showed you in video 2. And we were just shocked because although we were in this space, none of us had ever actually read this book before. We'd all heard the concept of love and respect. Most of us have, but we hadn't actually looked at what the book said. Joanna had even been given the conference DVDs as a wedding present, but she had never watched them. And we're sitting there as this group of 3, horrified to have learned what kind of teaching is being peddled to, at this point, millions of people. And we said, well, we have to do something about it. And so what did we do? Well, we are nerds, and so we did a study. And you know what? I'm not the one who did the study, so let's actually talk to Joanna. All right, Joanna, why don't you introduce yourself to everyone?
Hi there, I'm Joanna Schwartzy. I'm originally from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, but I've been in Canada ever since I've been a grown-up. And I am the stats nerd of our little group. We all met because of Bible quizzing. I quizzed with Western Pennsylvania and Rebecca with Eastern Canada. My husband was from Canadian Midwest. And so here we are, the Bible nerds combined to talk about our long-standing hyperfixation on evangelical marriage books.
Absolutely. And you are part of our team because you are trained in statistics too.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So my undergrad is inexplicably in microbiology, but I then went and did a master's degree in public health. So in that program, I took a ton of stats classes, did much more of an epidemiology focus, and then have continued that with lots of quantitative research, both for our books and also for our peer-reviewed publications and conference presentations.
Joanna is actually the reason why we were able to do all of the research that we did, because she is so skilled in this area. And so then do you want to tell us about the study that we did?
Mm-hmm. So Rebecca and I, in between nursing, pregnancies, all of the things, it was quite the 6 months, developed a survey instrument, and we sent it off. And I thought, okay, great. We'll get for sure 1,000 people. Ideal is 5,000. We got 5,000 people in the first day. Mm-hmm. It was freaky. We ended up with more than 20,000 women filling out our online survey. And it was really long, over 100 questions, very personal questions. That was the first time that I realized what a deep well there was of need for people. Some people wanted to tell their stories. There were stories that were hidden that they didn't feel like they could share. They were like, please tell my story. Please let me get my voice heard on these issues. And that was the first time that I really realized what a depth of feeling there was, how much anger, how much hurt, how much everything there was under all of this stuff. And so that began what is now a long-term research project. We've written a number of books for the layperson. We've presented at the American Physical Therapy Association's Combined Sections meeting as workshop speakers. And we've also published, we have one paper out that we're going to be talking about today in the Journal of Sociology of Religion. And then we just had one accepted last week as we're recording this at the Journal of Sexual Medicine.
And our initial study, what we really wanted to measure was whether or not specific teachings in evangelicalism hurt or helped marriages. Because like we said earlier in this video, for anyone who's watching, because you're watching this in part 3, we had this hypothesis that the messages in these books were actually causing the dysfunction. It wasn't that the dysfunction was already there, or if it was already there, it was worsening it. And so do you want to tell people how we did that?
So what we did is we looked at common evangelical teachings about marriage and sex, both for women before they're married. So the idea that when you're dating, the boys are going to want to push girls' sexual boundaries, and also stuff about after marriage. So for a really key example there is the idea that women are obligated to have sex with their husbands whenever he wants it.
Which is a teaching that we do find in Love and Respect.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Or have sex so that he won't use porn. Also everywhere in Love and Respect. If you don't have sex with him, he's going to stray and it's going to be your fault. So we looked at whether or not believing those tropes either before you were married or currently, and then before marriage, we either assess that in high school or during the preparation for marriage phase, and then how that belief affected marital satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, and experience of sexual pain. That's what's in our paper at Sociology of Religion, which is called Sanctified Sexism, and we'll have that in the description. But we also, of course, wrote up all of the results in The Great Sex Rescue.
Yes. Which I have right here. So this is The Great Sex Rescue.
It's great. It sold 100,000 copies, which I think is partly means we did a good job, but also it tells you that there was really an audience for this. Like, there has been a heart cry for something better than what we've been given.
Well, because unfortunately what we found in our study is that believing these common evangelical teachings that in essence say the husband's needs are greater than the wives, because that is the through line, is that the women have to kind of kowtow to what men need. Women need to submit to what men need. It decreased marital satisfaction overall. They decreased sexual satisfaction for women, including lower orgasm rates and lower libido levels and higher rates of sexual pain. Yeah. So we're finding that these teachings are creating more dysfunctional marriages and are creating more painful sex lives. And no one wants either of those things. And yet that's the fruit of what we are teaching. So then after we did that study, we wanted to go even deeper into specifically the love and respect questions. So do you want to explain what we did a couple years later?
Yes. We were inspired by your husband, Connor, who looked at the love and respect question and said, actually, guys, if you think about it, if you are alone and unloved, you are a hermit. You are in the woods somewhere, or you could be. Like, many of the mystics have been alone and have felt presumably rather unloved because they were just the desert fathers being desert fathers. But if you are both inadequate and disrespected, that means that you know that you cannot do the thing that you are expected to do and you are being denigrated for it. One of these is just being a wizard. The other one is, I don't know what, like, horrifying fate that is, but that's terrifying. And we were like, Connor, yes, you have much wisdom. And so inspired by that, we decided to do a ranked choice question to say, okay, what actually are people responding to? Are they responding to alone, unloved, inadequate, or disrespected? Because it could be any or all of them. That's the problem with double-barreled questions. So we thought, let's try. So what we discovered is that actually Connor is correct. People are totally chill with being alone.
Yeah.
Both men and women were like, yeah, alone is better. If I had to pick, that's what I would be versus unloved, inadequate, or disrespected. We found that both men and women are very anti being unloved. That was the one that they were both ranked the worst if they had to pick. What was really interesting was that there were more men who chose inadequate and more women who chose disrespected.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense, right? If you consider, let's look at my husband and I, right? He is 6'2" tall and big. He weightlifts a lot. Okay, and then you have me. I am 5'1" and change. He's little itty bitty. If Josiah sees somebody who's doing something wrong at an intersection, he will look at them in the eyes and say, "Don't do that thing." I will keep walking because I am more vulnerable.
Well, and we know that in the patriarchal society that we are socialized into, women are not judged as much by competency as men are. We know that men have more pressure on them in this realm of competency. This is how our patriarchy kind of hurts everyone situation. And so our results make a lot of sense. And so the question is, were men reacting to disrespect, or were they reacting to inadequacy, or were they reacting to how okay being alone would be? We don't know.
Yeah, but it could be any and all of those. We also decided to look at effects of believing that men need respect and women need love when people got married and currently. And wouldn't you believe it was not good for marital satisfaction, sexual satisfaction, communication, and all of those results from that was a matched paired study. So we looked at husbands and wives that I was able to match. And those results are published in the book, The Marriage You Want.
And one of the reasons why we did do these surveys is, and the three of us have been talking about this for years, is we just want to raise the bar for what's acceptable. This never needed to be accepted. This was so obviously wrong. But because there's been such deep anti-intellectualism for so long in the evangelical church, we have a generation of people who are not able to figure out what is logical and what is not. And we're really hoping that with our work and with our books and our research, we start to change the culture in the Christian writing space so that it's not acceptable anymore just to put out your theories. You actually have to back it up either with your own data or someone else's. And the data absolutely cannot be one question with a double-barreled response set where you didn't even ask women. So to be clear, here's what we found. Love and respect isn't just teaching bad theology. It's not just bad research. It's not just a bad idea. Teaching love and respect objectively makes marriages worse. When you believe the central premise of love and respect, that men need respect in a way that women don't, and that women need love in a way that men don't, marriages do worse. They are less happy, less good marriages. Not great.
It does work. It works every time. It works.
Now, let's look at a couple stories that show us why. And let's start with Sarah.
My name is Sarah. My husband Jacob and I have been married for 6 years, and we have a 3-year-old and are expecting our second child within the week.
What was your experience with the love and respect concept? When were you introduced to it?
So I've always heard about the book. My parents have touted it as the best marriage book they've ever read. And so when my husband and I started dating, my dad bought copies for him and I to read. Basically, if you're going to date my daughter, this is the blueprint I would like you to follow. And so that we read it together, had some conversations, and really didn't dig deeper or think more about it. And I didn't realize how much it had impacted me until we were married.
What were some of the things that made you realize that impact that came up down the road?
The biggest hurdles that we had early in our marriage were all related to sex. It wasn't until years later that I realized how much love and respect had fed into that philosophy. I went into marriage genuinely not knowing it was possible for a woman to have the higher drive. And so when I found that, coupled with some issues with porn and other things, it was very much this dynamic of I went into marriage wanting to be the cool wife who was down for anything and he could brag to his friends about. And I don't even know why I wanted that in the first place. It's certainly not something my husband wanted. And yet I found myself pushing to be that image, even if it's not necessarily what I wanted or necessarily what he wanted in those moments either. My husband very much came into our marriage wanting us to be equals. And I came into our marriage thinking, yes, we're equal, but he's the head of the household. Even when reading Love and Respect, reading his chapters on leadership or whatever, we had conversations then, and my husband was like, I want us to be equal. And in my head, I'm thinking, yeah, but that's not what the book says. And so I'd put so much faith in this book that, like, my husband doesn't really know what he wants. I know what he wants. I can do that for him.
What actually made you ditch the love and respect mentality yourself? What were some of the things that made you realize, wait, maybe this is holding us back?
It was months and years of me kind of deconstructing when my husband's porn use came out, and we cleared that up very quickly. Like, it really wasn't an issue. It wasn't as big of a deal as it certainly could have been. That was kind of a moment where it was like, okay, I've been doing all the right things and it wasn't enough. So then what's the solution? And that's when we really started having these conversations about what we wanted and how we actually wanted things to look. And again, a lot of this did revolve around sex. Everything outside of the bedroom was really fine. And so we were kind of navigating that. But the big turning point for us was kind of figuring out how to close our orgasm gap and things like that, which we read GSR during his deployment.
That's our book, The Great Sex Rescue, written by myself, and my co-authors, Joanna Schwartzy and Sheila Gregoire.
So we read that over the deployment, and all of a sudden, this book was putting words to feelings that I had but could never have communicated. And at one point, I had pulled out my copy of Love and Respect, and I was just like flipping through to find the terrible quotes, and I was going back and seeing everything I'd highlighted, and just seeing how much those words, even though I didn't really remember them, had built such a foundation for the things we had to dig ourselves out of.
So you had a situation where once you kind of stopped following the script of love and respect, you actually got to have a marriage of equals, which is what he wanted all along.
Yeah.
And now that you guys have figured out a marriage of equals and you guys are more free to just be who you are instead of living out social or sexual scripts that are written by some 60-year-old man, how would you characterize the relationship, how it's changed?
I think one of the biggest things is that our communication has changed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the problems we had, the gaps we've had, those have all closed. But also we're much more open about, hey, I'm struggling with this being the societal norm, and I don't match that script. Here's what I need. Here's what we're navigating. You know, personally, I still fall in the trap of, if I'm being a stay-at-home mom, taking everything on my plate, and my husband saying, no, that's not what we're doing here. We have more of these moments where we stop and say, hey, okay, this is a societal script we're following that we don't need to be following because we don't want to, and we're both taking responsibility in these areas.
First off, can we just give massive props to Sarah for doing an interview literally days before she went and had a baby? I told her she didn't have to, but baller move for doing that. Thank you so much. But while Sarah and Jacob were always in a safe and healthy marriage overall, even if aspects of it were damaged due to Love and Respect's teachings, that's not the case for everyone who read this book. So now let's hear from Jennifer.
I was married to a Southern Baptist pastor for 21 years. We had 4 children together, and I have been divorced for 6 years. Introduced to Love and Respect, I think in 2006, give or take, right around there. And we did it as a group study with our Sunday school class. I remember several couples raving about it in positive ways, saying how wonderful it is and beneficial. So I had that. And I trusted them. So I had this idea that this book was going to be great and helpful. And because my lenses were colored that way, I just kind of with reckless abandon, went all in.
Would you say that overall your experience with Love and Respect helped your previous marriage or harmed your previous marriage?
I would say that it harmed it because it taught me to enable a mindset of selfishness and entitlement in my husband at the time. I was essentially conditioning him to be self-centered and then conditioning him and rewarding him with that kind of behavior.
Mm-hmm.
But like I said, unbeknownst to me, I actually, because I still had a voice of my own at that time, 6 or 7 years into our marriage, I was still speaking up when things were merits being standing up or speaking up about something that's not okay. But right around this time when I was reading Love and Respect and buying into it, that discontinued, and he thought that was great. And because we had less conflict, I also kind of had this idea in my head that maybe our marriage was better. But it wasn't the less conflict. It was just that I was becoming less.
So it wasn't that you guys were actually improving your marriage. It was that you had simply stopped bringing things up when they bothered you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just became less valuable, less human, less, all around less. It just felt like anything I did was disrespectful. So if he just didn't like it, it was disrespectful, or he could tell me I was being disrespectful, and whatever it was, I had to stop. The word respect and disrespect were weaponized against me. And I think I feel very confident that it came from this information, this material, reading this book together, and him coming to this epiphany that he needs respect. And if he doesn't have respect, then everything is, our marriage is bad, and it's my fault because I didn't respect. Mm-hmm. So, and I remember even asking him, what about this is disrespectful? Because I am willing to do differently. I want to learn because I love you, and I don't want you to have the felt experience of being disrespectful. That's an awful experience. There was no answer because what I was doing was not disrespectful. And, even with active listening, I could never really truly grasp what I was doing that was disrespectful. Using the word respect and disrespect was a way to undermine any productive conversation because the conversation stopped. Because whatever the conversation was disrespectful. It undermined productive conversation. It undermined problem solving. It kept me from being known in my own marriage. That was actually something I very much had to deprogram after my marriage ended, was this idea of respect. And the words respect and disrespect actually became trigger words for me that gave me a visceral reaction that I didn't realize I had until after my marriage ended. So that is how deeply rooted those words were used as conditioning.
I'm curious, as someone who has escaped an abusive marriage, there is multiple times where Eggerichs says, your husband is a good-willed man, and you can't take a snapshot to prove that he's not, because if he's truly evil, he'll always be evil. And would you like it if someone took the worst snapshot of your life and defined you by that? And he uses that kind of language quite a bit. What does that do to the person who's in a relationship with an abuser?
It definitely causes someone to question their reality when the person is yelling and raging, which is abusive, and saying abusive things the night before, but then the next morning they're standing behind the pulpit saying, let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only what is helpful for building others up, that it may benefit those who listen. It's a mind twisting situation. And then you hear people saying, see, he's a good person. And they didn't see last night when the child left the refrigerator open this much and all hell broke loose. Abusers are not abusive all of the time. It would be so much easier to identify if that was the case.
One of the most jarring revelations that we've had in the 7 years that we've been looking at this book was not actually how bad the research was. It wasn't actually how often he would just slap Bible verses onto sentences that had absolutely nothing to do with the Bible verse he slapped onto them. Rather, it was this. He already knew he was making abuse worse. He already knew that his advice was being weaponized against women, even back in 2004 when he was writing the book. He just didn't care. The harsh reality that we have come to accept is that they already knew. This was not a surprise. In his own book, Emerson Eggerichs writes that he got a message from a woman that read this. Now, whenever he senses anything that smacks of disrespect, even when it isn't, it reminds him of our past and he gets infuriated. I haven't seen such rage in a while. Actually, I regret letting him know about what I had learned from you because he uses it against me each time. I can take on the criticism. I feel I deserve it, but his rage is withering and makes me want to get away and hide. And in the book, Emerson doesn't then say, you shouldn't have to be subjected to withering rage from your spouse. He doesn't say that we shouldn't be weaponizing this concept of respect against you. Do you know what he says? He instead takes the next couple of paragraphs to praise his own mother, who never once badmouthed his father, even when he was abusive too. It is a harsh reality to accept that these people who have put themselves in positions of being teachers, who have put themselves in the position to give advice to people who are suffering, to people who are in abusive and damaging and dysfunctional relationships, do not care when a woman feels so scared she wants to get away and hide at her husband's rage. And yet, this is the reality of love and respect.
Some women are very nervous. Your father's coming home. They personalize things. I've seen women through the years just, they talk about being on eggshells. I've never received any email from any man. I've received thousands of emails from women. I'm on eggshells. I've never had one from a man. I'm on eggshells.
Eggerichs suffered severe childhood trauma, and I honestly believe that the cry of his heart, his core desire, is to make sure that no other kid goes through what he went through.
But that's a very deep thing for a little one to go through. That's why I have a special place in my heart for little kids who get exposure to different things like that, because I can kind of feel what they feel, and children are aware.
I never saw my dad kiss my mother but one time in those early years. Didn't even know that kind of happened until one time it happened, and I realized I never saw this. Would you
maybe make a decision to give me a gift. That instead of me experiencing it with my mom and dad, that you'll give this as a gift to your children. That you'll give this as a gift to your children. And maybe your mom and dad didn't give it to you, but the Lord will honor you for the decision you make to change the legacy.
But he diagnoses the wrong problem.
And he wasn't an ill-willed man. He was an insecure man at certain moments when he perceived certain things coming at him, and he didn't know how to deal with that.
They got the wrong guy.
My dad was not a Judas.
He arrested the wrong suspect.
He's not superior to me. I'm not inferior to him. I really think this is your attempt to return to patriarchy so that we'll fear male dominance. I'm not going to be treated like a doormat and walk on eggshells. I'm certainly not going to feed his narcissism, his ego. I'm not going to lose a sense of myself or identity or subject myself to emotional abuse. But other than these things, I'm really open to hearing what you have to say about this.
It seems that the goal is simply stability at any cost, even if the cost is the woman's autonomy, personhood, identity, and safety. If heaping the sins of abusive husbands onto their wives' shoulders is what allows kids to grow up in a facade of stability, then I guess he sees that as worth it. And I think that this speaks to his desperation more than anything else. And then he uses emotional threats like, well, this is the way of God, or well, that's your child's father. And so how is the abused woman supposed to feel like she's empowered to stand up, speak out, or even leave? True peace, true stability is not about the absence of conflict. It's about the presence of safety. And you cannot have a safe home when one or multiple people have to erase themselves or make themselves smaller in order to stay out of the way of a violent family member. And yet, this is the mandate for the women reading Love and Respect who are stuck in a marriage like his mother was. That's why I agree with what our experts were saying earlier, that Love and Respect can be understood as a trauma response of a scared little boy better than it can be understood as some sort of theological or research pinnacle of marriage. Unfortunately, Eggerichs seems to be so blinded by his refusal to accept that his father was not a good-willed man, that he has knowingly perpetuated his own parents' cycle in the next generation. And it's not just Eggerichs who's doing this either. We've discovered that this callousness in the face of women's suffering was true of Focus on the Family as well. When we presented Focus on the Family with that big report of all the comments and all the stories, and at this point the hundreds of stories that we had received of people who had been harmed by Love and Respect, even some saying that it had caused them to be suicidal, that they had almost lost their lives, we heard absolutely nothing. Crickets. We did not get a single email back. A fun fact, though, we did have a cookie on the email, so we could see that it was forwarded and sent a whole bunch of times to a bunch of different places, but no one responded back. What did end up happening, though, is that our readers and people who were finding our material started messaging Focus on the Family and saying, why are you still recommending Love and Respect? Don't you know this hurt me a lot too, and this is a problematic book, and there are so many better books out there that you could be recommending instead. And it's very funny because then people started getting different emails based on who was emailing them. Some people got emails from Focus saying that, well, of course, we don't recommend this book in cases of abuse or in severe marital distress, and other emails saying, no, this book is a healthy, good model for biblical marriage. And of course, the book itself claims to be for everyone and has examples of affairs and, again, withering rage and people being terrified of their spouse's anger. So how on earth can we assume that this is not for abusive situations? But what was clear to us, and what has remained clear to us, is that Focus on the Family and other large Christian organizations that have been instrumental in sharing and promoting the Love and Respect message are more interested in saving face than they are having a clear, definitive statement on whether or not they believe this book is harmful. They care more about making sure that their public image is maintained and that their donors remain happy than they are taking a firm stance against things that harm women. And this should not be surprising when this is an entire organization that was built up to pretty much bolster the conservative resurgence that was all about making sure that women remained in their godly rightful places, which is, of course, subservient to their husbands and to other men. They may talk about how their main goal is to bring people to Christ and to preach the gospel, but at the end of the day, what is it that Focus on the Family is focusing on? It's this idea of traditional Christian marriage. It's very tempting when we hear stories of people who are harmed to try to rationalize what happened. Well, any book has its good and its bad parts, so you should have just chewed the meat and spit out the bones. What's different about Love and Respect versus other books is that this book's very premise is actually related to marital suffering. In our own studies, we have found that when men agree with Love and Respect's premise, that respect is a man's deepest need, their marriages are far worse. And of course, tons of research has found that when men hold the power in a relationship, when anyone holds the power in the relationship over another person, that marriage is not healthy. We are not designed to be in a power imbalance with the person that we are sexually intimate with. But beyond that, a lot of people will say, yeah, but this book is for people in like pretty normal marriages who just have to make things better. I will say that's a really, really bizarre and nonsensical argument for why it should be okay that books damage and harm and even perpetuate the abuse of people in dysfunctional and dangerous relationships. It's like saying, well, this medication might hurt people who need it, but the people who don't need it is pretty fine. Who's reading marriage books? Who feels like their marriage needs to be helped and saved? It's not people who are like, yeah, I'd give us a solid 95 out of 100, but it would be nice to get a 99. And also remember that the book itself starts out with saying this book is for everyone. This book is for anyone, people in marital crisis, spouses headed for divorce. Many of those options are not people who are in pretty good marriages who just want to fine-tune things. I just wanted to say that because this is one of the most popular and best-selling marriage books that is out there in the evangelical church. And I know that a lot of people feel like, well, I may have read this book and I'm not now a bad spouse. That's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is we need to be willing to listen to these stories to understand that sometimes the medicine that we are giving couples in the name of Christian advice is doing far more harm than it is good. Now I want to introduce you to Anita. She and her husband were also really hurt by love and respect, but in a very tangible way. Let's hear her story.
We went into our marriage as best friends, and yet I really felt absolutely convinced that I had to temper myself, not offer my opinions unless they were asked for, that his opinions were going to be better than mine, because that was a way of showing respect, was thinking that he knew better than me. And actually we kind of got into a bit of trouble sometimes in me not offering the wisdom and the caution that I had. Quite early in our marriage, we had some savings, and my husband is an accountant, and he came up with the idea of investing in the stock market. The type of investing that he was looking at doing was kind of small margin investing with borrowing money from the bank. And so it meant that our savings would be the collateral. I didn't really feel comfortable with the idea, especially of borrowing money. It felt like too much of a gamble. I'm kind of more of a safe player, and he is a risk taker. And I didn't even feel that I could say, I don't think this is a good idea. And I didn't speak up. And so he started investing in the stock market, but he was getting freaked out by it, by watching it go into loss sometimes when there was a fluctuation down first before up. He lost his nerve, I guess. I could have at that point said, no, hold it just for a little bit longer. Like, it's going to be okay. He ended up selling at a loss multiple times because he freaked out and didn't want us too far in debt. The thing was that, number one, I didn't want him to invest in the first place in that way. And if I'd spoken up, he wouldn't have. He would have listened to me, and he would have not done it, because there was no way he would have invested our money in something we weren't both happy in. And number two, he would have held the line and held steady. I mean, we ended up losing all of our savings on this, and that wasn't even a huge part of it. That was just that it was a symptom of this thing of I wasn't bringing myself to the table in our marriage. I was too scared to voice my opinion. I felt like it would be audacious and disrespectful of me to think that I had any knowledge or wisdom that he didn't have. I do remember there being a couple of times where I felt really resentful that I was being such a good wife and he was expressing frustration about the way that I was being. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm being such a good wife. I'm not arguing with you. I'm letting your opinion be more important than mine. I'm doing all these things. And he would be like, but I don't want that. I never said that. I don't want you to be like that. I want to hear your opinions. And I would be like, yeah, right. And it's like I was putting the book on him. I was putting the opinions of Emerson Eggerichs on him as, all men think this and all men want this. And he so didn't want it. It so was not what he was thinking. And yeah, he was just flabbergasted any time it came up. He was like, but I've never been like that. Poor guy. I think one of the major things that has kept recurring is that anger is a sign that you've been disrespectful. That still messes with me to this day. If my husband shows any signs of annoyance, I'm instantly checking, what have I said? Have I said the wrong thing? Did I word that right? Was I gentle enough? I do look back on certain things and I grieve what we lost, because we came into this marriage as best friends, and we could have been a really strong team, like straight out of the box. And yet, because I was silencing myself, I wasn't present. I wasn't fully there. I wasn't participating fully. I feel like there are multiple things in our lives that could have succeeded if I had been part of the team instead of just a follower in our marriage.
We cannot ignore the harm that someone causes simply because it makes sense due to their backstory. We need to figure out how we can have empathy for both the person who was harmed and the person that harmed person then harmed later. And we need to be able to have accountability. And I think that starts with understanding that empathy towards Eggerichs does not mean allowing him to keep being an authority over others. It means that empathy for a man like Eggerichs means looking at him and not just seeing the Bible teacher who lied about scripture to get women to give up their voices. It means not seeing him as this uncomplicated mustache-twirling villain like from Scooby-Doo. Having empathy for Eggerichs means looking at him and seeing that 3-year-old boy throwing his tiny body between his father and his mother, just trying to get daddy to stop hurting mommy. It means seeing the pain of spending years and years of watching your family be ruled by fear and terror and never being able to be honest with your mother about what you are going through because of what your dad is doing. And it means challenging the people in his community, in his personal life, the publishing houses, the media conglomerates. It means challenging them to come alongside him and see him as a brother in Christ who needs shepherding, not a teacher who needs authority. The scandal of Love and Respect, at the end of the day, is not that it's a story of a man whose main goal was to uphold patriarchy. That story makes sense. There's a clear-cut villain, and it feels nice and warm for us because we know who's the bad guy and who's the good guy. Rather, the true scandal of Love and Respect is that this is the cry for help of that scared 3-year-old boy, pounding his fists against his daddy's legs. It's the natural result of a young man terrified of his father and yet identifying with him and trying to make sense of those complicated feelings. It's the rationalization of how he can possibly see his father as noble when he sees similar desires to be placated in himself. It's the complex answer to the cognitive dissonance that the abused child experiences as they piece together the turbulent relationship with their abusive parent and process the dynamics that enabled them. And in summary, the real scandal of Love and Respect is that in trying to redeem his own parents' story, in trying to give the advice that he thinks his parents needed back then, he doomed thousands of couples to repeat his own parents' dysfunction over and over and over again.
Unconditional respect.
Is that okay that he has a need that you don't have?
So I have this air hose connected by this respect tank, and I need to breathe in that respect like I breathe in air. And when she stands on my air hose,
unless there's downright evil confirmed by 2 or 3 witnesses.
My dad attempted to strangle my mother to death.
That doesn't necessarily mean that person's an evil-willed person because they've done evil things.
And he wasn't an ill-willed man.
How does a mommy and daddy live together?
He puts her up against the refrigerator and tries to choke her out.
My dad was not a Judas.
This is the way of God. Wish mom and dad would have had an opportunity to hear this.
Because I cried myself to sleep many night, and I just wish that my mom and dad had gone to a conference like this for me.
If somebody had just gotten to my mom and dad like maybe I'm having the privilege of getting to some of you.
Thank you so much for sitting with us in these 3 episodes of the Love and Respect Deep Dive. This has been a project for us for 6 years. This was incredibly hard to put together, and there is so much more that we could get into. When I say we have a spreadsheet of quotes that is miles wide that we didn't even get to include, I am not lying. We also have more interview data. We have podcasts and articles that we didn't even get to include because there's so much that we could talk about here. And so we are going to be putting together some bonus content episodes for you. If you want to join us on our Patreon, you'll be able to see all of those. But overall, I wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who made this podcast series possible. I want to say thank you to the people who support our work through the Good Fruit Faith Initiative, who are dedicated to making sure the conversation around sexuality and marriage changes in the evangelical church to something that is healthy, evidence-based, and biblical. I also want to thank our patrons who are an emotional support for us, who encourage us, who I can always ask questions, and who are some of our best internet sleuths. I can send them on missions to the weirdest parts of the internet and they will bring me back gold. And I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who was willing to be interviewed for this, whether it was due to your expertise or to your experiences. We are so grateful that you took the time to do this. We are so grateful that you lent us your stories and your voices and all of your hard researched knowledge. And finally, I want to thank you Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching this. And of course, share this with people who you think might find it interesting. And if there are any other topics in evangelicalism that you think deserve a deep dive, let us know in the comments. But as for us, I'm glad to be able to close the chapter on love and respect for a while. And I'm really not sure how to end this thing. I mean, I want to do something with the good fruit faith, but all I can think of is be fruitful and multiply, but I don't like the connotations of that. So for now, I just want to encourage you. Don't be afraid to think. Don't be afraid to use your brain. Don't be afraid to test the fruits, because I really and truly do believe that Jesus was serious when he said that he is the truth. We do not need to be afraid of research. We do not need to be afraid of science. We do not need to be afraid of changing our minds in light of better information. And so until next time, we'll see you later.